So were you guys hold on. Were you guys waiting around to see if you could F her in the peenie live on TV?
Yes.
Is that what you were waiting?
Not you, but yes.
That was Shauna Hunt, a Toronto FC reporter who was approached by a number of obnoxious, drunken hooligans that yelled this bizarre viral gimmick at her, F her right in the P. Now, there are a number of legal questions surrounding this because this is something that has taken place over the course of the last year and a half or so. It's truly become viral. And in Calgary police are actually considering laying criminal sanctions against people who do this type of thing. The guys in the video, one of them who works for Hydro One has since been fired. There are two other. We are awaiting what happens to them. In the meantime, I'm here with Ed Prutschi to break all of this down. Ed, let me start with the criminal sanction aspect of it. Toronto police have not threatened this just yet, though they may actually have a case, I suspect, you'll say. But in Calgary, there are Calgary police officers that are threatening this type of thing. What criminal sanctions could these guys potentially face?
Right, so Calgary Police Service has actually reached out to reporters and to networks and said, look, if this is happening to your reporters, call us, send us the video, because we will pursue public charges, essentially, against these individuals and indicate that this is a form of obscenity, a form of cause disturbance. That's the criminal charge that is relevant here. I think there's also the possibility of what's called a mischief damage to property. Ultimately, these types of network airings, they belong to the network. The network spends a lot of money putting these together. It's valuable property, and when a person obstructs that property, damages it by interfering, running into a scene, they're also causing the network to either have to reshoot, get potentially fined by various Canadian networks who are not permitted, obviously, to air this kind of language live, or have to throw away the footage entirely and not be able to use it.
How can this be destruction of property if they're in a public space? The broadcaster and the individual does not have domain over that space.
Well, but so there's two elements there. First of all, the law indicates that the public disturbance, the nature of that charge, cause disturbance, is in a public place. You can, of course, cause a disturbance in your own private property or in any other private property if you have the permission of the property owner. But when it comes to the public sphere, the criminal law does say there are certain things you can't do in the public sphere. We deal with, for example, nudity charges, hate speech. There are all sorts of things.
Yeah, but you're specifically talking about Section 175 of the Criminal Code in our arena. It
Right.
says, everyone who, A, not being in a dwelling house, causes a disturbance in or near a public space, one, by fighting, screaming, shouting, swearing, singing, or using insulting or obscene language, by being drunk, or by impeding or molesting other persons. I think there could be the case there that this would be a public disturbance. But to your point, you argue that this is destruction of property.
Yeah, I think, well, obviously the section that you've read I think is relevant as well. I think you could make an argument that it's mischief damage to property. The property being the broadcast. The broadcast is private property even though it's happening in a public sphere. That doesn't mean that just because you're doing it on a public street that you're not permitted to act that way. I mean, the broadcasters have a right, in fact, have an important duty to go out into the public to make these kinds of videos, to report on things. And when a person deliberately steps into a broadcast, it's not accidental. It's not the guy in the background holding up a peace sign or trying to get himself on television.
No, but where do you draw the line? What happens if a kid walks into a broadcast and goes like this?
If the goal, and I think this is something that courts would have to look at, if the goal or the intention appears to be to damage the value of the broadcast, to make the broadcast either unairable or unutilizable by the network, then you've arguably damaged their property. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to go out and criminalize all these people. In many respects, I've long been an advocate to say I don't want the blunt instrument of criminal law to come into effect and sort of hit people over the head in situations where we can deal with it in a different way. The interesting thing, I think, in this case is that in many respects, the damage caused to the individuals who have now been caught on camera, as it were, is far more serious outside of the criminal law sphere than it actually would be in criminal law. If they were prosecuted successfully, whether that's for cause disturbance or whether that's for public mischief, you're probably looking at some sort of discharge, a very small amount of community service, maybe a charitable donation, a tiny fine. We've seen people lose six-figure, $100,000 plus jobs because of it. So the consequences are extraordinarily serious.
You know what? We're going down a slippery slope if we start to take these things and say, oh, that's disturbing the peace. What about an LGBTQ parade? I'm sure there are plenty of people that are swearing there. I mean, what about a rap concert, for instance? There are plenty of people swearing there. But I want to take this one step further. One of the guys who didn't actually yell this bizarre gimmick has actually been fired from his job.
That's right.
He's a Hydro One employee. Do they have a right to fire him?
They do, and this is the difficulty that he's facing now. I think a lot of people think it's over the top, but Hydro One and the other employer for the second individual have been put in a very difficult situation. It's become public that he is a Hydro One employee, so people have unearthed that, and they've turned to Hydro One and said, what are you going to do about this employee who has publicly sexually harassed a female reporter out on her beat doing her job? And it becomes a very dangerous situation for the employer, because if they do nothing, the question then becomes, well, don't you care about sexual harassment in the workplace? Don't you care about the perception of your company out in public? So this is a private actor, not a state actor using government power, a private actor saying, you know what, we don't want to be associated with an employee like that, and under our code of conduct, we're entitled to terminate if it brings the reputation of our business into disrepute.
I mean, I question what their code of conduct states. Do all Hydro One employees have to step in the event that someone's being offensive and interfere and say, no, that's not okay?
Well, I don't think
didn't even yell.
I don't think they need to step in.
He didn't even yell the gimmick at this reporter.
Well, no, but he definitely brought himself into the phrase. So he's not the one who throws it out there. And it's not as if the Hydro One is saying you should have gone in and pulled your buddy back. What he did was he goes in and basically pats him on the back, repeats obscenities, and justifies it. I mean, he's asked straight up by the reporter. Ms. Hunt turns to him and says, what do you think about that? And he says, I think it's effing hilarious. And he goes off on his own rant. So he got caught up in that.
As much as Hydro One has a right to fire him, and I think that they do, as you say, he also has a right to sue for wrongful dismissal. What do you think? I mean, does he have a strong legal standing?
Not particularly. I mean, he can respond and say I'm wrongfully being dismissed, but I think when they go to the code of conduct, when they go to the fact that this got into the public sphere, when they go to the fact that people on Twitter and social media virally were calling for Hydro One to take some form of action, and when you look at the generalized approach these days to sexual harassment in the workplace, I think Hydro One is justified, and he's going to have a tough argument to say, you got to keep me on the job. Imagine the danger, the damage to the company if it turns out that this guy made comments like that to other employees in the workplace, and Hydro One did nothing, even though they knew he had been on video at TFC shouting these kinds of obscenities or supporting them. That would be extraordinarily damaging to them legally and professionally.
Ed, take off your sort of legal guard for a second. Just
Never.
be just a regular individual, not a defense lawyer. What is your personal take on this whole story?
So, I mean, if I look at it personally, I don't like seeing somebody lose a job. I mean, losing a job is one of the most important things you can ever have. In terms of that level of sanction is absolutely devastating to somebody. It's very difficult for him to bounce back. Even if he looks for another job now, he's always going to be known, or at least for the next little while, as that guy, the guy who was on the video and lost the job because of it. So the sanction is grossly disproportionate to the level of culpability, I think, in that conduct. If I'm giving people advice, putting that legal hat back on, I would say you got to watch what you say in the public sphere, because nowadays almost everything is public. Everybody's got a camera everywhere. If you're asking me if I were his employer, would I immediately terminate him? I don't know that I would want to take that step. I think there'd have to be some level of punishment.
Maybe a suspension?
Right, a suspension. Some people have suggested sensitivity training. I'm not a big believer in the success of those types of programs, but at least it demonstrates that you're trying to sort of defend the issue, address the issue, and make sure that it doesn't happen again in your workplace. But boy, 2 beers, one drunken comment, and $106,000 job in the toilet.
By no means am I suggesting that this guy is an upstanding citizen, but come on. I mean, he could, I don't know how old he is or if he has a family, but he could, and he's just lost everything because of one drunken moment in public, and I think it's a shame.
Yeah, and look, the message that it sends to everybody else is don't be that guy. Don't be that one guy, because the consequences could be, as I say, grossly disproportionate to anything you ever thought of. And unfortunately, when people are drunk, they don't think about it.
Well, we'll see what happens. Ed, great talking to you.
My pleasure.